Welcome today, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So ourselves, SSE and Cornwall, are going to be talking to you about solar and battery and the role of these two important technologies, asset classes, as we call them, for the energy transition for net zero. So I'm Richard Cave-Bigley. I'm the Director of SSE's Solar and Battery Business Unit. And I'm going to tell you three things today. Thanks, Fiona. I can now see the slides.
Perfect.
So we're going to tell you a little bit about this market from our perspective, what we're doing, and give you a bit of context in terms of SSE's business in this space. I'm going to talk about the market in general. So why solar and battery are such important components of the energy transition. And I think our friends at Cornwall are going to do the same. I'm also going finally to talk about some of the key success factors which we've been working on and which we believe are critical to delivering on net zero with these technologies. Before I kick off, let me tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. So we created a business unit relatively recently. In truth, we've been growing a business in this area for a little more than 3 years now. And in that time, we've grown organically to nearly 100 people today. We've grown a pipeline of some 2 gigawatts of projects in the near term, and we're also now in delivery, in construction on our first projects. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about why SSE is doing this. SSE is very well known, I think, in the UK, in our home market, for wind, for in particular onshore and offshore wind, for our hydro, traditionally for thermal projects, which now clearly we're moving to convert to zero carbon fuels like hydrogen and to CCS. And we're also known for a few other things like network infrastructure. But I think a key development for the business a few years ago was to take a clear decision to grow. And that means growing both into new markets, but also to grow into new asset classes. And in doing that, we've also made some time ago a decision to focus entirely on net zero with our strategy. It is our core and our center every day with our business. And next slide, please. So in doing that, solar and battery has become clearly a good fit for what we do and for our strategy. It fits with our skills, our strengths, and it also brings an important diversity to our energy portfolio. So firstly, on our skills, we understand energy markets and power markets in particular, and have to navigate the volatility of those markets, but also understand how they're going to develop in the future. And then we spend a lot of our time as businesses clearly developing, constructing and operating infrastructure assets in these power markets. Increasingly, solar and battery requires those skills, especially as these projects become larger and more complex, and therefore it is a very good fit. It also brings diversity, and a couple of great examples of this would relate to the natural fit of battery to renewables, and equally of solar to wind. So battery is a relatively new but key form of flexibility, and fits very well in providing a certain form of energy storage. And similarly, solar is a very predictable form of renewable generation, and putting solar and wind together, whether it be on a site as a project or writ large across an economy like the UK provides a greater degree of predictability as a whole. So the two generation profiles fit well together. Next slide, please. So a little bit on just where we sit. So SSE, I won't dwell on this slide, but SSE sits in two areas. On the right of the slide, you can see are our regulated networks businesses. I won't talk about these today much further. We operate very clear business separation between the energy businesses on the left and those businesses on the right. We are all part of the same group, but today I'm talking to you from and about the businesses on the left. We sit within that energy portfolio. A lot of that portfolio is about developing utility scale infrastructure, and that's what the solar and battery business does. It develops utility scale solar and battery, today focused on our home markets in the UK and Ireland. It is the case that some of our cousins in the wind and hydro business that we call renewables have grown into continental Europe recently and into Japan, and we're already starting to work closely with our colleagues there to help them think about co-location of solar and battery on their wind portfolio that they bought, the Siemens Gamesa portfolio. But our core focus is the UK and Ireland, as I said. And that's where we sit in the group. We work with the business in particular on the left, EPM, that's our trading business that works across those energy units and will help to trade and dispatch our assets in this business. Next slide, please. So nearly done on SSE Group, a couple more slides. We have created a little time ago our sustainability goals. These are 4 key goals to 2030, which align with some of the UN's sustainable development goals. One of those is around emissions reduction, and we've made commitments based on science-based targets to reduce emissions intensity across our fleet of assets in line with the 1.5 degree climate target. Secondly, we've set out a goal to increase our renewables capacity, our renewables output rather, 5-fold. And solar and battery should form a key part of that. In delivering that, we've created what we call our NZAP, which stands for Net Zero Acceleration Plan. And that's on average going to be spending £7 million a day of our own money from our balance sheet capital on that plan. That amounts to some 25 billion of investment in this decade. And lastly, we are keen to not just deliver on net zero or do our bit in doing that, but deliver in the right way. And so we've put together our just transition strategy, which has many things to it, but is all about ensuring that the transition to net zero is fair and just and brings communities and stakeholders along with us. And we're encouraging and working with our peers in the industry to use this sort of thinking and work with us as we do this. Finally, on the specifics of what we've been doing and have delivered in the last couple of years at solar and battery, we've invested quite a lot of resource in building a pipeline. I talked about the number of people earlier, and that's growing still. Our most mature projects, we call that our secured pipeline. Nearly all of them now with planning consent now stands at 700 megawatts here in the UK. And in addition, we have earlier stage projects which we aim to bring online in the next few years. Our prospects, that's about 1.2 gigawatts, and we're in construction at our first project in Salisbury. We will go into construction on our first solar project, Littleton Pastures, this year. We're often building on legacy sites, so I'll show you in a minute two decommissioned coal sites at Ferrybridge and Fiddlers. We're also acquiring new sites, so we acquired Salisbury and Littleton, as well as a large battery project, 320 megawatts at Monk Fryston. We're also developing from scratch new concepts and projects for the longer term, and deploying co-located assets, so solar plus battery. Many think this will become the norm for this market, certainly in this country, and some of our prospect projects are already looking to do that, whilst also applying other areas of innovation. Next slide, please. When it comes, this slide, here we go, will show the first 4 projects and where they're located. We've tended to focus so far on England and more southerly locations. And you can see here, these 4 projects don't make up quite all of our first 700 megawatts of secured assets, but it's some examples of the earlier projects we expect to bring online first. So bottom right is the Salisbury project I mentioned. It's a 2-hour duration battery, so it will be just shy of 100 megawatt hours. And we are now well on in construction. I think concrete pour has started, and we expect to bring that into operations later this calendar year. Very excited about that. The Littleton solar farm, we will enter construction this year. That's there in the middle of England, you can see on the map, and should be operational soon after in 2024. And then moving a little bit further north in England, 2 similar sized batteries, 150 megawatts each. One consented, that's Ferrybridge, and the other one late stage planning, that's Fiddlers. And they should be in operation in 2024. I think late stage 2024 is our current schedule for Fiddlers. Next slide, please. I'm just conscious I'm running a little bit into time, and we are looking to turn shortly to Cornwall, so I will try and hurry up. Secondly, talking a little bit about the industry, and I know our friends at Cornwall will talk a whole lot more about this, so I'll try and give our perspective as SSE on this. Solar is clearly one of the cheapest forms of energy sources. One of the reasons it's a key net zero enabler, in my view, is its learning rate. So it has possibly the highest learning rate versus its sort of peer technologies. For every doubling in global capacity, it has proven itself to reduce, that as an industry, we can reduce the unit cost by at least 20%. And that's driven over the last decade, from memory, I think more than an 80% reduction in the unit cost of solar, which are incredible gains. And that has made it one of the most cost competitive sources of power today, including here in the UK. Battery storage is similar. They're both quite modular technologies, and that means that we can enable and drive gains in the cost relatively very quickly. It's also clearly a proven technology that provides important flexibility that enables us to move now, it's happening right now, from minority shares of renewables on the grid, so a smaller penetration, to already going beyond 50% here in the UK. When we move to greater penetration of renewables, the system requires much greater and more diverse forms of flexibility. Battery is a key form of storage at the moment, clearly shorter duration, but that duration has been moving from half an hour perhaps a few years ago to 2 hours today, or more even. These technologies are both reliable, the technologies behind them are proven, and they're flexible. They can be constructed in modular fashion, quickly, and with a predictable profile and performance. And they work very well together, as we've already referenced. Cornwall themselves have research that shows that we may need the capacity of batteries here in the UK to be as much as 10% of capacity, and that will be, I expect, north of the equivalent of north of 10 gigawatts, as many of the leading analysts seem to be currently forecasting as this industry develops. Solar energy, finally, is vital to the government's objectives. It's stated recently that it's pushing for a 5x on capacity. I think there's some 15 gigawatts of solar today in the UK. A lot of it utility scale solar farms, some of it rooftop, and a 5x of that is moving to 70 gigawatts and above, which is a significant growth market. And then finally, I will try and race through. Fiona, next slide, please. 3 key success factors for us. A lot of talk at the moment about each of these from the industry. No doubt many of you have heard discussion of these recently. Grid is a key barrier to the pace of that change, and a lot of us are calling in the industry for change, which I think is happening and is coming. In simple terms, faster build of infrastructure, smart build of infrastructure, and a change in the system so that we can connect projects quickly enough for net zero. The recent tech amnesty from Grid is a good example, I think, of something that can help to speed through some of this change, but this is going to be really important for the pace of change that we might see. Secondly, location, always important and has always been important for infrastructure developments, and it goes without saying that biodiversity enhancement, which is more than feasible for these kind of assets, is important, as is early engagement with stakeholders. And on this final point, a little bit of perspective, I think, is key. It's our view that solar and battery are complementary, and solar has been in the news a lot recently, last year, on this point, are complementary to agriculture and the agricultural industry in the UK. The analysis shows that 70 gigawatt target, which is a significant one, would require only 0.5% of UK's farming land, and actually this industry can offer a lot to UK farming. I think we've seen that quite a lot of the farmers and the farming industry here have come out in favour of solar, and perspective there is a very important thing. We think the two are very much complementary. Finally, supply chain, which is a global and complex thing, needs to develop at a pace and in a manner that is appropriate for what we need to be doing here and what we can do with these technologies. It is quite concentrated, particularly in China, and we've seen, it's been in the news this week, the drive at the moment to diversify and to create local supply chains, which we at SSE are a big believer in. Clearly, there's been the act in America that President Biden has pushed, that is doing already quite a lot in this regard, and I think clearly Europe is now thinking and looking at this point. Policy here, we think, is vital, and this change is very welcome. Another key point is the push for transparent, responsible and sustainable supply chains. There's a lot of good work that has been done, but I think it's fair to say that given the growth of this industry, a lot of work still to happen. A key development for us has been the creation here in the UK and in Europe of the SSI, the Solar Stewardship Initiative, which we're members of, which has come out clearly not only to condemn any form of human rights abuse, but also to lay out codes, a standard essentially, and an audit tool and assurance process for achieving the things we've talked about: transparency, responsibility, and sustainability in those supply chains. And I'm very happy to say that program is looking to launch the rollout of those codes and processes later this year. So 3 key areas for the growth of this industry globally, but also here in the UK. So finally, to say thank you very much for listening. These are really exciting markets, very important markets of growth for the UK, Europe, and the world. And we at SSE are very excited to be growing with our peers in the industry in these markets. We'll hand over before questions to our colleagues at Cornwall. And
thank you
time from myself at SSE.
Thank you. And just to check, Matthew, are you able to hear us at all now?
Hopefully. Am I
Perfect,
now audible?
Lovely. You are indeed.
Excellent.
I'll just stop screen sharing for a moment and get your slides on screen.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. Fiona, could you share the slides,
yes,
please? I don't want to
push
my laptop through any more
no problem.
difficulties.
There we go. Hopefully you can see them now.
I cannot.
Nope,
I don't know
not
if
yet.
others can.
Okay. Here we go. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, I'll just say a few quick words about Cornwall Insight for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We're a consulting, training and subscription services company with offices in the UK, Ireland and Australia, providing a range of insights and bespoke services across the energy value chain. And in the research team, we specifically focus on expanding the knowledge of the company through reports and partnerships on products and projects. Next slide, please. And so I'm Matthew Chadwick. I finally get to speak after some technical difficulties. I'm a lead research analyst here at Cornwall Insight, and I'll be giving you a run through of solar and batteries in the UK and some of the drivers for combining the two on a single site. Many of the things have already been touched on by Richard, so thank you very much for that. And next slide, please. So we'll just start with solar. As already mentioned, solar PV is one of the major renewable technologies, generation technologies currently in the UK. And there is a stated aim as part of last April's energy security strategy to triple the current capacity to around 50 gigawatts by 2030 and 70 gigawatts by 2035. And despite the UK not being famous for its sunshine, solar remains an attractive technology for many investors and developers due to, as Richard said, the high learning rates, which have helped lower the levelized cost of electricity and kept it below other key generation technologies, which can be seen in the graph on the left. And also its fairly predictable output profile. So in the graph on the right, you can see the typical solar output for a UK day. Next slide, please. I already mentioned that solar is one of the major renewable technologies in the UK at present, and our latest modelling suggests that it will increase to be the third largest generation capacity by 2030, shown as the light blue section on this graph. However, even with this increase, our forecasts still have solar capacity significantly below the 2030 government target. And what this graph also shows is that there's going to be a general increase in installed generation capacity with an ever increasing proportion from intermittent renewables. And with this rise comes a need for more flexibility on the system. And this can be seen by the forecasted rise in battery capacity, as Richard already said, to sort of 10% of the installed generation capacity by 2030. And that's sort of shown in the gold and brown at the top of the graph. Next slide, please. So just to give a brief overview of the opportunities available for batteries. Batteries can be deployed in a range of revenue streams, with many of them interaccessible. So these include wholesale arbitrage, where energy is used to charge the batteries when prices are low, e.g. at night, and then exported from the battery back to the grid at peak times, creating a positive price spread. They can also be used in frequency response services, the balancing mechanism, and the capacity market. And in the last year, or last 12 months, frequency response services have provided a particularly lucrative revenue stream for batteries, and that can be seen in the table, particularly for dynamic containment. And the graph shows that looking forward, there's already a healthy pipeline of standalone battery projects due to come online this decade, and that's both in terms of capacity and number of projects set to come online. Next slide, please. So this brings me to the potential benefits and challenges to combining solar and batteries on a single site. So the primary benefits come from the reduced costs and the quick grid connection. By combining solar and batteries, you can reduce the costs associated with the infrastructure, the land, and the leasing. And given that for a solar farm, you're obviously only going to be exporting when the sun is shining, then during the night, there is paid for grid connection that is otherwise unutilized, that a battery can therefore take advantage of. And looking at grid connection times for a standalone battery project, at the moment, many developers are reporting that they cannot secure grid connection times for a standalone battery before 2030. By adding batteries to an existing solar project, you can obviously get them online and on the grid much quicker. And another benefit comes from the range of revenue streams available, and that's shown in this sort of theoretical schematic on the slide. So the battery can still be charged from the grid overnight when prices are cheap, and then used as for the same revenue streams as for a standalone battery, or it can be used to help spread the export profile of solar generation. So maybe if you're trying to meet a specific demand profile as part of a corporate PPA, that would be an example when you might want that. And the battery can also be charged directly from the solar generation. This tends not to be the most cost-effective solution compared to charging the battery from the grid, but there are situations where you might choose this solution. So when you're grid connection capacity is causing substantial curtailment of solar export, or when prices for solar are negative, then there might be a sufficient business case for this. Having said that, combining solar and batteries are not without their challenges. Key amongst these could be the challenge around cannibalization and site optimization. So on this graph, if you take half hours 33 and 34, you can see that there's still enough sunlight to be exporting from the solar farm, but there is also peak hours when the battery can get the most value from exporting for arbitrage or grid services. But there isn't sufficient grid capacity in this example for both to be exporting at the same time to full capacity. So does the right of way go to the most lucrative revenue stream, or potentially to the asset that was built first? In this example, it would be the solar farm. And so there's this sort of complexity and optimization that needs to be considered with these sites. It's far from an insurmountable challenge, but it does clearly add a level of complexity to co-located projects. Next slide, please. So lastly, I just wanted to show a similar graph to the one I showed previously for standalone battery projects, but now for combined solar and battery projects, so co-located solar and battery projects. And that shows an almost exponential growth in the capacity in the pipeline for this decade, with the number of projects flattening off after 2025, indicating that the continued growth in capacity is really a trend towards increasingly large capacity projects, potentially driven by more interest in energy parks. If you have any questions about any of this, then my colleague Tom Faulkner will be taking part in the Q&A afterwards, and I've also put my email on here if you want to get in touch with us after the webinar. Thank you, and sorry again for the technical problems.
That's fine. Thank you so much, Matt. We have quite a number of questions that have come in. If you are all happy, I guess Matt, Richard and Tom, we can just proceed with moving on to the questions. We've got about 20 minutes left in the session. So I'll just go through them in order that they came in. So first question, we've recently had the net zero review from Chris Skidmore MP. Does the panel think we're going far enough and fast enough on net zero?
Shall I kick that one off, and then perhaps Matthew, you might provide a view as well? I think I think that actually, so the task is clearly a big one, and that's kind of stating the obvious. I think we should take note that the UK it claims to be leading the way, and I think there is a point there. I think we should take note of how fast we have decarbonised the power grid in the UK. It's a fantastic achievement for the UK to have done that. There's clearly some way still to go, but I would say good progress must keep going. I think that probably the second thing for me is that there's a lot more diversification needed in our efforts, and I think that the recent Skidmore review is serving to point that out. Thankfully, it looks like the facts and a balanced view has won through in the debate around issues like farming, and happily in the last couple of months, some very reassuring affirmations of the importance of growing technologies like solar, sensitively and professionally. Of course, it has come through, so that's been great. But clearly, areas like heating and cooling, and areas around increasing, developing further the supply chain, these are areas where more needs to happen and faster. And some of the topics we talked about, like grid capacity, are really critical areas of where fast action needs to be taken quickly to ensure we get there. So that's probably a very quick response to that one. I think that the Skidmore review has been calling this the growth opportunity of the 21st century. I agree with that, but I think the UK has to make sure it builds on all the work it's done. It sorts out some of the issues that the review has pointed out, and that we really grab that opportunity and ensure we put sustainability and net zero at the centre of everything we do. Matt and Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Afternoon, everyone. By the way, my name's Tom Faulkner. I'm head of assets and infrastructure and networks here at Cornwall Insight. I think I'd echo a lot of what you would say there, Richard. I think that we have done well in decarbonising power. You look at power compared to some of the other sectors, transport especially, and over the past 15, 20 years, there has been significant decarbonisation, and there are subsidy schemes in place. There is a kind of investment market there for decarbonisation. So I think there are lots of things being done, and we've got a fairly significant pipeline of projects that want to connect. But there are potentially some barriers that need to be overcome to help us get there. And I think grid connection is the one that Richard has already talked about. And yeah, there's been a lot of noise around that recently because it's a really important thing that needs to be overcome, because otherwise we're not going to be able to reach those targets. It's all well and good having projects ready to go, but if they can't actually connect to the network, then they can't be providing that electricity. So I think that's one of the key things, and it will be interesting to watch the kind of wider global economic market going on as well. If we think about supply chains, we think about global recession, availability of materials, those are all things that we can't completely forecast and can't foresee, but there are going to be an increasing demand for some of these materials as not just GB, but the wider world looks to decarbonize as well. So I think that what we will need to be doing is looking ahead to some of those things, and I think as Matthew has said, and Richard, there are really great opportunities for some of those kind of shared grid connections, some of those quicker connections that solar and battery co-location supports, and even wind and battery co-location. So there are real opportunities there to overcome some of these and mitigate some of these, and there's already things that National Grid are doing to kind of reduce that. But there does seem to be an appetite in the market to kind of decarbonise and things like that. I think there are just some hurdles that we need to overcome before we can look on it with too much sunshine and rainbows, if that's the best way to put it.
Thank you. Tom, another question's come in that you might be best placed to answer around what has been and what will be the impact of volatile wholesale prices on the solar and battery pipeline.
Sure, yeah, I think one of the things we've seen recently with batteries is that some of the revenues that they have been able to achieve in some of National Grid's frequency response services, dynamic containment particularly, and as Matthew pointed to on one of his slides, have been quite significant. There's been some really lucrative prices there, but as I think it was the next slide pointed out, there are times where solar and battery will both want to be exporting to the grid, and the grid connection won't necessarily allow that. So I think the wholesale market often means that there are greater opportunities for those participating in some of those response services, because if the wholesale price is high, then selling as a wholesale export is kind of beneficial and lucrative, whereas it means that it does push up some of those prices in those response services. But we're already seeing those those revenues decrease a little bit. They're not necessarily as lucrative as they have been. And so I think one of the really key things, especially for solar, will be some of that certainty around price. The CFD is looking to procure solar, and one of the things will be that it's now going to be in a pot with onshore and offshore wind. That's a greater amount of competition, and we haven't received the full budget for the next allocation round of the CFD, but there will want to be that certainty of price to allow companies to have sufficient investment, because whilst solar has a kind of very low levelized cost of energy, there will need to be things in place to ensure that people are confident that over the course of a lifetime they can achieve the revenues that they want to generate for that solar farm.
Thanks, Tom. We've had a couple of questions from the audience just on the regulators and Ofgem. The first question for the panel: do Ofgem need to do more to clarify the regulatory regime for generation licence exempt storage?
So my view as Richard is, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think the short answer is we are focused as a business on large scale battery applications. So our projects are typically 50 or 150 or bigger megawatts per project. That means we will have a generation license. So I'm afraid, whilst I was aware of some of the calls from industry regarding that, I might well now be out of date, because we're squarely focused on applications and with the acquire a license, and we will have one. So I'm sorry, I'm probably not best placed to give a current and up-to-date view on that. I don't know whether friends from Cornwall would have a view or not.
Yeah, it's a good point, Richard. I think we've been waiting for quite a long time. I think it was first mentioned in one of the smart systems and flexibility plans that BEIS issued alongside Ofgem about defining battery storage, and that was a number of years ago, and we're still waiting. We still haven't got that definition that they said they're going to be working on, and so I think there could well be some clarity that's needed, especially to support deployment of those smaller scale battery assets. As Richard said, for those larger ones, you need a generation license anyway, and so it's maybe less kind of necessary. But I think definitely in the kind of definitions of storage, especially when we start talking about kind of short duration, medium duration, long duration storage, things like that, making sure that it's clear what we're talking about, making sure that actually there is real kind of clarity on who needs generation licenses and things like that. But I think there's just a kind of waiting from industry to kind of have some more of that definition on exactly what that's going to be, and it may well support some of that smaller scale deployment, but in terms of a wider net zero piece, a lot of people are looking to those larger scale batteries as well, because of the technology that is advancing at quite a significant rate that is allowing them to be deployed. So I think there's also quite a push to some of those larger scale battery and solar and things like that, as Richard has pointed to.
Thank you. A couple of questions from the panel on REMA. So aligned to what do we think could be the long-term impact of market design reforms such as REMA, and then particularly, I guess, versus our plans, particularly in the solar and battery space as SSE?
I think.
Go on. Yes.
Sorry, Richard. Yeah, I think at the moment, REMA is in its very infant stages, and we've seen a consultation on a number of different options. I think some of the things to maybe highlight that could impact, rather than gazing into my crystal ball necessarily, definitely some of the kind of things around pricing and whether we move to locational pricing or zonal pricing or things like that. There are potential impacts around that in terms of revenues and the revenues that kind of generation assets might be able to achieve. One of the other things is kind of deployment of subsidy schemes. They're looking at reforming to both the capacity market and the CFD, and whether that's maybe done on deemed generation rather than actual generation, and whether kind of removing kind of wholesale risk and things like that. So I think, without completely avoiding the question, it's hard to know for certain exactly what those impacts are going to be. However, it is going to be important for the solar and battery, especially batteries in the flexibility space, because that's going to be such a big part of the market, to be able to be aware of what's going on and to be a part of the discussions. I don't know if you've got any more specific kind of SSE focused things you guys are looking at, Richard.
I think you've covered a lot of the points. It's probably quite a tough nut to crack in a minute or two. I think with batteries, on your last point, it's obviously really important that there are incentives in whatever system we have that drive the right actions, that drive efficient outcomes, and for things like battery that provide that market incentive for them to do the important job we talked about, to charge with surplus renewables when there is a surplus, and then to provide that power back to the grid when required. I think REMA is a great opportunity for us to hone and refine the system we have. I think clearly, obviously, something we haven't talked about a great amount today, but should reference, is the current energy crisis, high prices, global prices of gas. We have to increase the amount of homegrown, cost-effective, renewable power, and so I'm pretty confident that REMA will help to drive that. So I think we've probably covered the key points.
Thank you. There's been a question asked on battery storage and how it compares to hydrogen as an energy storage medium, if you want to give a view.
So we're sort of alternating, Matt and Tom, so happy to kick off on that one this time. So there's different forms of storage, many different forms, and you have to think firstly about power, secondly about energy, how long you're providing that power for, and a few other variables. Storage is at the moment providing a very fast response and relatively short duration. By that I mean obviously battery storage. Hydrogen has the capacity to provide a different kind of service, if you like, to the grid. I think one key difference today is that batteries are very much here now, commercially viable, growing very fast. Hydrogen shows a lot of promise, but in terms of commercial readiness and some of the technology development, there's a little time yet before it reaches a similar level of maturity. And it's obviously a very different form of storage medium. A key variable there will be the cost of transportation and logistics for hydrogen as a fuel, and it can do some different things that applies on both sides, I think. So batteries, in summary, very cost effective, commercially viable here and now, providing specific services to grid. Hydrogen can do a lot of things potentially in the future. There's a lot of hot debate actually at the moment about just what hydrogen will and won't do, and in some senses might have even more applications, but is sort of further out. Matt and Tom?
Yeah, I wouldn't add much more than that, Richard. I think you've hit all the points I would. Yeah, batteries here and now, hydrogen potentially for the future, but we'll have to wait and see, really.
Thank you. We've probably got time for one more question.
I would just say one final thing on hydrogen. I probably should have added. We at SSE think it is one of the things it's very strong. I know there's a lot of debate at the moment about hydrogen in homes, for example, here in the UK, but and we're not so engaged in that, but we are. No, sorry, we're looking a little bit at that, but I think that one of the big things we talked about is industrial applications and hydrogen to power, and I think that is actually a really good example of where it can work. So it is already viable to use hydrogen in a gas turbine, and hydrogen shows particular promise in some of the areas of industrial activity which need to decarbonize a lot more. So I think it is fair that we kind of reflect there's a lot of detail there, and from my point of view anyway, I think there's some areas where it has particular mileage and focus. So sorry, Fiona.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll just finish up. There's one other question there just around BEIS and the government, and do the panel feel that they're providing enough support and direction for the market to deliver? And if not, what more do we think they can do?
Sorry, Fiona, could you repeat the question?
Yes, sure. So just around BEIS and the government, and whether or not we feel they're providing enough support and direction for the market to deliver against the net zero agenda. And if not, what more do we think that they can do to support us?
I'm happy to kick this one off. I think that there has been a lot happen in the past 18 months or so, starting with energy security strategies, REMA, net zero reviews. I think that there is a desire from government to want to be able to deliver on this, and we're seeing an increasing amount happen to support this. I think one of the key things that we'll need to keep an eye out on, if we think about kind of net zero being 2050, that's still 27 years away, the cogs of policy turn slowly, and what we need to ensure is that we're getting these things right now, rather than making mistakes and having to revisit these things down the line. Obviously there will need to be tweaking, and so I think what the government will need to be doing is not that it's not doing anything, but it will need to make sure that these policies, that these agendas that are supporting the net zero are future proofed, and that they are looking to support the deployment going forward before future future policies have to come in to kind of make sure that we really hit those targets. So there's a lot going on, and I think the Chris Skidmore review, REMA, energy security strategies, things like that, there's a lot going on. There's definitely a desire from government to want to be able to achieve those targets. It will just need to be that listening to industry, making sure that everything is taken into account, and that there is sufficient investment and deployment opportunity for generation, and that the wholesale prices remain affordable throughout that. And there's that's not a kind of one bullet saves all answer. So I think that there's a lot being done, and I think we need to kind of make sure that we are interacting with government as it goes through these schemes.
Yes, conscious of time, I think that's a great answer. I don't have a huge amount to add. I really agree with the pace point. It's important to keep the pace up, and that isn't and won't be easy. I will actually say one thing. In addition, I think we should reflect on the fact that the UK is one of the leading battery storage markets in the world. We're growing our capacity fast, and in that sense, there's a lot of support and direction to drive that kind of innovation and change. We've just got to keep it up, and as Tom and Matt have said, ensure that some of the gaps where perhaps it has, it is hard to drive change quickly, that the efforts are made to nevertheless achieve that.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. We don't have time for any more questions, so I will thank the panel today for their contributions. So thank you, Richard and Matthew and Tom from Cornwall. I will follow up with some additional resources just detailing more about SSE and solar and battery to everyone who has registered today, and I thank you all for your time. Thank you and good afternoon.